I
But
mean,
that,
yeah, I was going to say
yeah,
is like
no.
graphic design. Now, this is the thing, well, because I went to a traditional graphic design school, so the debates, the traditional design is like, well, you're not really designing, you're handing over the keys to the machine. But then I remember like Eric Spiekerman once was talking about designing the label of a medicine, like say diabetes, and now
Hmm.
you could look at that and say, well, this is boring. But if you look at in terms of the impact you're actually having on people and
Right.
how you have to be so detailed in the considerations. Yeah, you're not going to be designing this amazing custom piece of design, but in reality, what you're doing is far more important. There's a huge responsibility, and I think a lot of the trying to work with the machine is about that rather than no, I'm going to have 12 pixels or 12 points is going to be my
Yeah.
body copy, and that's that. I mean, what do you say
Yeah.
to that?
Um, well, I think it's absolutely true. Um, and I really appreciate Eric's point of view on a lot of these things. That
Yeah,
um, I'm very much of the school of thought that type is never going to be neutral. It's always going to influence the emotional tone of the content that it is conveying, and it's going to influence it one way or another. But it's never not going to influence that. And so now you are using that as part of your design elements, to warm something up or cool it down. To if you're designing packaging for medications, the care and thought that needs to go into what do the numerals look like is critical,
yeah,
because that stuff's going to be printed really small, and people with aging eyes are going to be trying to read it. So you need to be really thoughtful about what is the shape of a 3 versus an 8 versus a 6 and a 9,
yeah,
and how do those read at a small size. So that's the same thing when you go, from a small inexpensive phone handset to a 30-inch iMac screen, or whatever the biggest size is these days. And that's those are very different considerations, but they're equally important. And so that's why I really appreciate that, focusing in on the how do we make this work well on the device. And so I'll usually default to what is 100% on a given device, because that's going to vary. Desktop
yeah,
browsers, basically it's 16 pixels, or at least 16, the equivalent of 16 pixels in our mind. And never mind how, how high res the screen is. That's
yeah, yeah,
doesn't come into it as much. But on a phone, deciding what 100% is handled by the device manufacturer and the operating system vendor who's setting up the software on there, to say, okay, we think this is going to be readable text. They know better than I do, so that's what I default to. I don't set body copy any smaller than the default of 1 M effectively on a given device, and it'll only go bigger from there. And so I try and use the things that other people have figured out, and then
yeah,
how do we improve upon that or build upon that from there. And the same thing can be applied, when you get into variable fonts, and like what would you do. So now we're thinking about, as the device capabilities increase, it's not just the size of the text, but what's the mode in which you're seeing it. Is it a light mode or a dark
yeah.
mode? So the variable fonts are amazing for that, because you might want to vary the weight of the text when you invert the contrast. So, depending on the typeface, in most cases, you want to go a little bit lighter when you have light text on a dark background, because there's a tendency to fatten up. I mean, our eyes, especially as they get older, that will lose sharpness, and it'll kind of bleed together like an old CRT screen, if you can
When I,
think back that far.
when I was looking into verbal